Rylan had not spoken to another person in months. He lived far from cities, far from noise, far from anything that could disturb the peace he had built for himself. His home was a small wooden cabin hidden in the middle of an endless forest. The sound of the river in the distance, the rustle of leaves, and the crackle of the fireplace were the only voices he heard. He liked it that way. For years, Rylan had chosen this life. No one knew exactly why he left the busy world behind. Some said he had lost everything. Others guessed he was running from something. Rylan never confirmed any of it. Out here, it didn't matter. Out here, there were no questions, only silence. It was late autumn, and the nights were cold. The wind pushed against the cabin walls, making them creak. Rylan sat at the table, slowly drinking tea from an old tin cup. Outside, the forest was dark. No moon tonight. The firelight flickered on the walls, throwing long shadows. Then it happened. A sound I was faint, almost swallowed by the wind. 3 slow knocks. Rylan froze, the cup halfway to his lips. No one ever came here. His cabin was a day's walk from the nearest settlement, and there were no marked paths. Another knock, this time, softer. But urgent. Rylan stood, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He reached for the rifle hanging near the door. The metal felt cold in his hands. "Who's there?" he called, his voice rough from disuse. No answer. He unlatched the door and pulled it open. The wind rushed in first, cold and sharp. Then he saw her. She stood there in the dark, her figure barely visible in the dim light from inside the cabin. She was tall, slender, and strange. Her skin caught the light in a way he had never seen before, smooth and faintly glowing. Her hair, long and silver, clung to her shoulders, wet from the rain. Her eyes, they were the most unsettling thing. Large, bright, and not quite human. Her clothes were torn, parts of them shining faintly like metal worked into fabric. Across her cheek was a thin cut, and her lips trembled as she spoke. "Please," she whispered, her voice soft but desperate. "Help me." Rylan hesitated. Everything about her was wrong. She didn't look like anyone from Earth. She looked otherworldly. She stumbled forward, catching herself on the doorframe. Rylan stepped aside without thinking, letting her in. The moment she crossed into the cabin, she glanced over her shoulder, as if checking to see if something or someone was following. Rylan closed the door, sliding the bolt into place. The fire crackled behind them, casting light on her face. She was young, maybe in her 20s if she had been human. But her features were sharper, more delicate, and her ears came to a slight point. Small, glowing flecks moved in her irises like shifting stars. "You're hurt," Rylan said finally. She nodded but didn't speak. Instead, she sat by the fire, holding her hands close to the flames. They were shaking. He grabbed a blanket from the bed and draped it over her shoulders. For a moment, they sat in silence. Only the wind and the fire spoke. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked at him carefully, as if weighing whether to answer. Then, after a pause, she said, "Lyra?" Rylan waited for her to say more, but she didn't. She stared into the fire like she was somewhere else entirely. After a long moment, she turned to him. "They're coming." Rylan frowned. "Who's coming?" Her voice lowered. "Hunters." The word made his skin crawl. He didn't know what she meant, but there was something in her tone, fear, mixed with certainty, that told him she believed every word. "I can leave," she added quickly. "I don't want to bring danger to you." Rylan shook his head. "It's too dark and too cold. You won't make it far tonight." She looked down, her hands tightening on the blanket. "I don't have anywhere else." Outside, the wind rose, carrying with it a sound that wasn't quite the wind. It was distant, faint, but strange enough to make Rylan glance at the window. Something was out there. The peaceful life. he had guarded for years was shifting, cracking, and he knew whatever this was, it would not leave him untouched. When Rylan finally spoke again, his voice was steady. "You can stay tonight," he said, "but in the morning, you tell me everything." Lyra's gaze met his, her eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. She gave a single nod, and in that moment, without knowing it, Rylan's life of silence ended. Morning came slowly in the forest. The mist rolled between the trees, and the damp air clung to the cabin walls. Rylan rose before the sun, as he always did, but his routine felt different now. There was someone else here, someone who didn't belong. He glanced toward the fire. Lyra was still sitting where she had been the night before, wrapped in the blanket. She hadn't slept much. Her eyes were open, watching the door as if expecting. It too burst open at any moment. Rylan poured water into a pot and set it over the fire. "There's tea," he said quietly. She nodded, her silver hair falling over one shoulder. Her movements were slow, as though she was carrying an invisible weight. They drank in silence for a while. But Rylan wasn't a man who liked not knowing things. He leaned forward, his voice low. "Last night you said hunters were coming. Who are they?" Lyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked toward the window, her eyes scanning the pale light outside. Only when she was sure nothing moved did she turn back to him. "They're not from here," she said at last. "Not from this planet." Rylan almost laughed, but something in her eyes stopped him. She wasn't joking. "Not from here," he repeated slowly. Lyra nodded. "They're soldiers. They work for my uncle. He took my father's place." Her voice trembled slightly. "He wants me dead, so I can't claim the throne." Rylan stared at her. A throne? An uncle? It sounded like something out of an old legend, but the way she spoke, steady, careful, made it feel real. "You're saying I'm a princess," she interrupted. From a world far from this one, Rylan leaned back, the wooden chair creaking under him. He'd heard stories about aliens. Of course, everyone had. But to have one sitting in his cabin, drinking tea, calling herself a princess, that was something else entirely. "How did you get here?" he asked. Lyra's gaze dropped to the floor. "I escaped. They were chasing me. I took a transport ship, and I made it crash here. Your planet was not my destination, but it is where I landed. And these hunters, they will follow me anywhere," she said softly. "They can track my energy. They'll come soon." The way she spoke, it wasn't a warning. It was a fact. Rylan rubbed his face. His life had been simple yesterday. Now it was tangled with things he didn't understand. "Why knock on my door?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment. Before answering, "'Cause your home was the only one without the noise of other humans. You live away from all of them. That makes it safer. For now." He didn't like the way she said "for now." The kettle began to whistle. Rylan poured the rest of the tea into her cup. "You should rest. If they're coming, you'll need your strength." Lyra shook her head. "I can't rest. If they find me here, they'll kill you too." Rylan shrugged. "If they come, I'll deal with it." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You're human. You can't fight them." He gave a faint smile. "I've survived worse than you think." Lyra didn't answer, but her gaze lingered on him a moment longer. Hours passed quietly. Though the air inside the cabin felt heavy, outside, the wind had died. The forest was too still, the kind of stillness that came before a storm. Late in the afternoon, Rylan went to the river to check his traps. Lyra followed, her eyes scanning the trees. "They could be anywhere," she said. "They'll have a hard time finding us," Rylan replied. "This forest is big, and it doesn't like strangers." When they reached the riverbank, Rylan bent to check a snare. Lyra suddenly froze, her head tilting like she had heard something far away. "What is it?" he asked. She turned slowly, pointing toward the deeper part of the forest. There, Ryland saw nothing at first. Then, movement. A shadow slipping between the trees. Too tall to be a deer. Too silent to be human. He straightened, his grip tightening on the rifle slung. Over his shoulder. "They found me," Lyra whispered. For a moment, he stood frozen by the river, the only sound the slow rush of water. Then Ryland stepped in front of her, his eyes fixed on the shadows. "Get back to the cabin," he said. Lyra hesitated. "You'll need me go," he said firmly. She ran, her silver hair flashing in the fading light. Ryland stayed by the river, watching the shadow move closer. He could feel it. Something was coming. Something that didn't belong in these woods. And just like that, the quiet life he had lived for years slipped further away. The sun had almost set by the time Ryland returned to the cabin. He moved quietly, circling the area before stepping inside. Lyra was waiting near the door, her hands clutching the edge of the blanket. "They were close," she said immediately. Ryland nodded to close. She glanced past him to the darkening forest. "If we stay here, they'll find us by nightfall." Ryland set his rifle down on the table. "If they're coming, better they come here than chase us through the woods." Lyra frowned. "You don't understand what they are?" "Then tell me," Ryland said. "I need to know what I'm up against." She hesitated, then sat at the table, her voice low. "They are called Karath. They don't feel pain like humans do. They don't get tired. They hunt until they catch what they want. And when they do—" She trailed off, her expression tightening. "They leave nothing behind." Ryland's jaw clenched. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. But even 1 is dangerous." Outside, the forest was slipping into darkness. The wind had changed, colder, heavier, carrying with it faint sounds that didn't belong. A faint hum, almost like metal, vibrating. Ryland moved to the cabinet in the corner, pulling out an old box. Inside were supplies he hadn't touched. In years, knives, fishing wire, traps, and a small pouch of nails. He spread them on the table. "What are you doing?" Lyra asked. "Making sure this place is less welcoming," Ryland said simply. He began setting small traps near the windows, looping fishing wire low across the doorframe and scattering nails where feet might land. Lyra watched him silently at first, then finally said, "You've done this before." Ryland didn't answer. As night fully took the forest, they heard it the first sign. A low, guttural growl. Not from a throat shaped like a human's, Lyra's. Eyes widened. "They're here." Ryland motioned for her to move to the corner by the fire, away from the windows. He picked up his rifle and waited. Then came the light, faint at first, glowing between the trees. Not lantern light, not firelight. Something colder, sharper. It moved slowly, stopping every few steps, as if tasting the air. Ryland's grip tightened. "Stay down," he whispered. The first figure emerged from the trees, and Ryland understood why Lyra had warned him. The Karath was tall, nearly 7 feet, with skin like blackened steel and eyes that glowed faint red. Its armor was strange, segmented, and seemed to move with its body. In its hand was a weapon that looked like a blade and a gun at the same time. It stopped a few meters from the cabin, tilting its head, as if listening. Then it stepped forward. Crack! One of Ryland's wire traps caught its leg. The Karath looked down, then simply sliced through it with a flash of its weapon. "They won't stop," Lyra whispered. Ryland fired. The rifle's echo rolled through the forest, but the Karath only staggered, a black fluid dripping from its shoulder. It turned toward him faster than he expected, and leaped onto the porch in a single bound. The door shook under its weight. Another sound came from the trees. More footsteps. Heavy. Measured Lyra's voice broke the tension. There's more. Then one. Rylan backed away from the door, motioning for her to follow him toward the back window. But before they could move, the Careth slammed against the wall. The wood groaned, splinters flying. Go. Rylan ordered. They climbed out through the back, the cold air biting at their faces. Rylan led her toward the river, moving fast but silent. Behind them, the cabin groaned under the weight of the intruders. When they reached the water, Lyra grabbed his arm. They'll track us here too. Good, Rylan said. Let them follow. He led her downstream, then suddenly veered into the thickest part of the forest. He knew every hidden path, every fallen log that could hide a footprint. The Careth might be fast, but this was his territory. Still, he could feel them following. The hum of their weapons grew louder. Lyra stumbled once, catching herself. They won't give up, she panted. Neither will I, Rylan replied. They moved deeper into the woods, the darkness swallowing them. Somewhere far behind, the cabin finally gave way with a loud crash. The hunters had taken his home, but not him. And as Rylan guided Lyra into the mouth of an old abandoned mine, he realized something. His quiet life wasn't just disrupted. It was gone now. He was in the middle of a hunt. The old mine was cold, damp, and silent, except for the sound of water dripping from the ceiling. Rylan guided Lyra deep inside, past rotting support beams and rusted tracks that once carried carts of stone. This place is a dead end, Lyra whispered. That's the point, Rylan replied. If they follow, they'll walk into the wrong end of a fight. He found a spot where the tunnel widened and set down his pack. The faint light from the mine entrance was their only guide. Rylan began unpacking the tools he had brought. Wire, nails, sharpened stakes, even an old jar of lamp oil. Lyra watched him work. You've done this before, she said again, her voice almost accusing. Rylan didn't look up. Living out here means being ready for anything. This isn't the same, she said. You can't fight them like you'd fight a bear. Or a thief. Rylan paused, then gave her a small smile. You'd be surprised. Before Lyra could answer, a faint metallic hum drifted through the tunnel. Her body tensed instantly. They're close. Rylan moved quickly. He poured the lamp oil across the narrowest part of the tunnel and sprinkled dry powder on the ground to catch the smallest footstep. Then he motioned for Lyra to get behind a pile of old mining crates. The hum grew louder. It was joined by another sound, heavy, deliberate footsteps. The mine walls carried the noise, making it feel like the hunters were already inside. Then, they were. The first Careth stepped into view, its glowing red eyes cutting through the darkness. Its armor shimmered faintly, reflecting the faint light from the entrance. Behind it, two more figures appeared. Their movements slow but certain. They didn't speak. They didn't rush. They simply advanced. Rylan waited, letting them come closer. The first one stepped onto the slick, oil-soaked ground. The moment its boot touched, Rylan struck the old lantern hanging above the tunnel. It fell, glass shattering, fire spilling across the oil. Flames roared up instantly, filling the narrow passage with heat and light. The Careth didn't scream, but its movements became sharp and angry. It stepped through the flames like it was nothing. Though the fire clung to its armor in patches, Rylan fired. The bullet struck its neck joint, making it stumble. The second shot hit the side of its helmet, sending sparks into the dark. The second Careth raised its strange weapon. A beam of bright energy shot past Rylan, burning a hole into the tunnel wall. The air filled with the smell of scorched rock. Lyra's breath caught. There, inside. Stay down, Rylan said, reloading fast. The first Careth lunged at him, its blade weapon flashing. Rylan dropped low, letting it swing over his head, then drove a sharpened stake into the side of its knee. The alien stumbled, its balance breaking for a moment. The third Kareth moved faster than the others, leaping over the fire and charging toward Lyra's hiding spot. She cried out, but Rylan was already moving. He grabbed an old mining hook from the ground and swung it with all his strength, catching the alien across the helmet. It turned toward him. But that small moment gave Lyra time to grab one of Rylan's knives. She stabbed upward, hitting the joint between the alien's chest plate and arm. The Kareth let out a low, vibrating growl, stepping back. Rylan fired again, this time aiming for the glowing red eye. The alien fell against the tunnel wall, its body twitching before going still. The second Kareth, still standing in the firelight, pointed its weapon again. Rylan dove behind the crates with Lyra, just as another beam scorched the ground where they had been. "They'll trap us in here," Lyra said, panic in her voice. "Not if we trap them first," Rylan replied. He grabbed the last of the stakes and wedged them into the wooden supports above. With one hard shove, the old beam cracked. The mine ceiling groaned, then collapsed. A wave of dust and rock filled the tunnel, crashing down on the two remaining Kareth. The firelight flickered wildly, then dimmed as smoke and dust swallowed it. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Rylan didn't move for a few seconds. Listening, no footsteps, no hum, only the slow drip of water when he finally looked at Lyra. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "You killed them." Rylan shook his head. "I slowed them down. That's all." She swallowed hard. "They'll keep coming." He nodded. "Then we keep moving." They stepped over the fallen debris, leaving the mine and heading into the freezing night. The stars above were sharp and cold, and somewhere far in the dark forest, a sound answered the quiet, faint, mechanical. And getting closer, the hunt wasn't over. The night air was bitter, cutting through their clothes as they left the mine behind. Rylan led the way, his steps silent on the forest floor. Lyra followed close, her silver hair catching faint starlight. Every so often she glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting glowing red eyes to appear in the dark. They didn't speak for a long time. Only the crunch of frost underfoot and the whisper of wind through the pines filled the silence. Finally, Rylan stopped near a thick cluster of rocks. Hidden between them was a narrow gap, just wide enough for two people to squeeze through. Inside was a small, hollow space, shielded from wind and invisible to anyone passing by. "This will do for now," he said. Lyra stepped inside, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She sat on the ground while Rylan gathered dry twigs and lit a small, careful fire that wouldn't give off much smoke. For a while, they simply warmed themselves. Then Lyra's voice broke the silence. "You could have left me," she said softly. Rylan didn't look at her. "Could have. But you didn't," she pressed. "Even after knowing what's following me." Rylan shrugged. "Didn't seem right." Lyra studied him, her golden-flecked eyes glinting in the dim light. "Humans are not like the stories I was told." He raised an eyebrow. "What stories?" "That you are selfish, primitive, that you only think of your own survival." Rylan gave a dry smile. "Some are like that. I'm not." Lyra hesitated before speaking again. "Where I come from? People like you would be soldiers, protectors. But you live alone, in the quiet." Why? His jaw tightened. "Because the world I came from took enough from me. I decided I didn't need it anymore." Lyra didn't push further, but her eyes lingered on him. She could see the shadow of old pain in the way he looked into the fire. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice lower this time. "I wasn't lying when I said my uncle wants me dead. I was next in line to rule my world. My father, he died suddenly. The council claimed it was an illness, but I know it was poison. My uncle took the throne, and anyone who might oppose him vanished. Rylan listened in silence. I escaped during a state gathering. I bribed a pilot to take me off-world, but the Kareth found us before we reached the jump gate. I was the only one who made it to the escape pod. It crashed here. And they've been tracking you since, Rylan said. Lyra nodded. They won't stop. Not until they see me dead. Rylan poked at the fire with a stick. Then Nell. Have to go through me first. Lyra stared at him. You mean that? Every word, he said. The forest outside was still, but Rylan's instincts told him the silence wouldn't last. He pulled his pack closer, checking the few supplies. They had left food for 2 days, water from the river. Some ammo. It wasn't much. Lyra watched him work, then reached into her cloak and pulled out a small object. It was a thin metallic disc with strange markings. She held it out to him. This is all I have left from my home, she said. It's a beacon. But not for the Kareth. If I can power it, it will send a signal to loyalists who might still be alive. Rylan turned it over in his hands. It was warm, faintly humming. How do we power it? A core crystal, she said. But they don't exist on this planet. Rylan thought for a moment. Then we'll have to make this place safe until help comes. Lyra gave a faint smile. You speak as if you're already part of this fight. Guess I am, he said simply. The fire burned low, throwing soft light across their faces. Lyra's eyes softened as she looked at him. You could have stayed in your cabin, lived your life without me? Why risk everything? Rylan's voice was quiet. Because I know what it's like to have no one left. And I'm not letting that happen to you. For the first time since she had arrived at his door, Lyra's posture relaxed. She leaned back against the rock wall, her eyes closing briefly. Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere far in the distance, a faint mechanical hum stirred again. Rylan's eyes hardened. The Kareth were still out there, and he knew they would come again. But now, the fight was no longer just about survival. It was about her. The next day began with no sunlight. The sky was heavy with thick clouds, the forest dim and cold. Rylan knew it meant trouble. Predators always moved more freely in weather like this. He packed their few supplies into his worn canvas bag. Lyra stood nearby, her blanket replaced with a leather strap he had cut from his own gear so she could carry a small pouch at her side. Where are we going? She asked. Down to the river, he replied. It's the only place we can control the fight. Lyra's brows drew together. You mean to fight them? Rylan met her gaze. We can't keep running. They're faster, stronger, and they'll track us no matter where we go. But I know that river, the current, the rocks, the choke points. If we're lucky, we can make it their grave. She stared at him for a moment, then gave a small, steady nod. They moved quickly through the forest. Every sound seemed louder, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the low hum that grew closer with every step. By the time they reached the river, Rylan's instincts screamed that they had no more than an hour before the Kareth closed in. The water roared as it rushed between jagged black rocks. A narrow crossing lay just downstream, where the current swirled into deep pools. This is where we make our stand. Rylan said T began setting traps with the precision of someone who had survived alone for years. Wires strung low between rocks, sharpened stakes wedged into the riverbed. Loose logs placed to roll into the current and smash anything trying to cross. Lyra helped, moving quickly, her movements more sure than before. She carried stones, tied wire, and tested the strength of the traps. Why here? She asked at one point. Rylan nodded toward the river. The current's strong enough to sweep them under, and the rocks will do the rest. But only if we get them to step in. By the time the last trap was set, The hum had become a steady vibration in the air. Lyra stiffened, her head turning toward the trees. They're close. Rylan grabbed his rifle and checked the magazine. Then we're ready. The first Kareth appeared on the far bank of the river, stepping out of the mist like a nightmare-given form. 2 more followed, their glowing red eyes locked on the pair standing on the near shore. They didn't speak. They didn't threaten. They simply advanced. Rylan fired first, the shot cracking across the river. One Kareth staggered, but it didn't fall. They stepped into the water. The first trap caught one of them. A wire looped around its leg, pulling it sideways into the current. It roared, a deep, mechanical sound, before disappearing under the swirling water. The others pressed on. Lyra hurled a rock, striking one in the helmet. It turned toward her, raising its weapon, but Rylan fired again, the shot hitting the gap under its arm. Black fluid sprayed into the water. The last Kareth reached the middle of the river. Rylan shouted, "Now!" Lyra shoved the loose logs into the current. The water caught them instantly, slamming them into the alien's legs. It fell sideways, the current dragging it toward the sharp rocks downstream. For a moment, the roar of the water was the only sound. Then, silence. Rylan kept his rifle up, scanning the far bank. It's not over. There could be more. Lyra's breathing was quick, her eyes locked on the swirling water. You did it." He shook his head. "We did it, but even." As he said it, he felt something shift in the air, a faint tremor in the ground beneath their feet. Lyra felt it too. "They sent more," she whispered. Rylan turned to her, his voice hard. "Then we don't stay here. We move." She hesitated. "Where?" T looked toward the mountains in the distance. Somewhere they won't expect. Somewhere they've never been. They gathered their gear quickly, leaving the river behind. But as they slipped back into the forest, Rylan couldn't shake the thought that the Kareth were learning. And next time, the fight would be even harder. The climb into the mountains was slow and punishing. The air grew thinner, the wind sharper, and the path narrower with every step. Rylan led the way, scanning for movement at every turn. Lyra followed close, her silver hair whipped by the cold wind, but her steps were steady. Days passed without seeing the Kareth, but neither of them trusted the silence. Rylan had lived too long in the wild to believe danger had simply vanished. On the 5th morning, they reached a plateau high above the forest. The view stretched for miles, endless green, cut by the silver thread of the river they had fought. Beside, in the distance, the clouds shifted, and Rylan saw faint flashes of red light in the forest below. "They're still looking," Lyra said quietly. Rylan nodded. "But they don't know where we are. Not yet." They built a small camp in the shadow of an overhanging cliff, which was protected from the wind and hidden from sight. For the first time in days, they could breathe without listening for every twig snap. That night, as the small fire crackled, Lyra spoke. "I've been thinking, when this is over, I can't go back to who I was before." Rylan glanced at her. "Princess," she gave a faint smile. "Yes, that title means nothing now. My people need someone who can fight, not someone who sits on a throne." Rylan stared into the fire. "And what about me? My cabin's gone, the quiet's gone, maybe for good." Lyra's gaze softened. "Then come with me. When we find my people, you'll have a place. We'll both have a place." Before he could answer, a sound echoed through the mountains, deep, metallic, and close. Rylan's instincts flared. He grabbed his rifle. "They found us?" From the darkness beyond the cliff, 2 Kareth emerged, moving faster than he had ever seen. Their armor gleamed silver black under the moonlight, and their red eyes locked on Lyra instantly. Rylan fired. The first shot struck one in the chest, but it kept coming. Lyra ducked behind a boulder as a beam of energy scorched the air where she had been. The second Kareth lunged at Rylon, swinging its blade weapon. He blocked with the rifle, the metal screaming as it caught the blow. He kicked hard, sending the alien back a step, then rolled to one knee and fired again, this time hitting the joint at its neck. It fell, but not before slashing across. His arm blood seeped through his sleeve. The last Kareth advanced on Lyra, ignoring Rylon completely. She backed away until her heels touched the cliff edge. "Lyra," Rylon shouted. She glanced at him, then looked back at the alien. In that moment, she made a choice. Pulling the metallic disc from her pouch, she smashed it against the alien's armor. The device sparked violently, sending a pulse of blinding light through the air. The Kareth staggered, its weapon falling from its hand. Rylon didn't hesitate. He charged forward, tackling it with all his strength. They both went over the edge of the cliff. The fall was short but brutal. They landed on a ledge below, the Kareth's body breaking against the rocks. Rylon lay still for a moment, catching his breath, then slowly pushed himself up. Above, Lyra's face appeared over the edge. "Rylon, I'm fine," he called, though his arm throbbed and his ribs ached. She climbed down to him, her expression fierce and relieved. "You could have died." He gave a tired smile. "So could you?" For a long moment, they stood there, breathing in the cold mountain air. The silence that followed was different from before, not the quiet of fear, but the quiet of survival. Lyra touched the metallic disc still in her hand. The pulse, it sent a signal. "If my people are alive, they'll come." Rylon nodded. "Then we wait here. It's safe enough." Days later, the sound of an unfamiliar ship echoed through the mountains. A sleek craft descended, its hull marked with the golden crest Lyra had described. Figures stepped out, not hunters, but her people. Lyra turned to Rylon. "Come with me?" He hesitated, looking at the mountains, the forest far below, the life he had known. Then he looked at her, the woman who had knocked on his door and changed everything. "All right," he said. They boarded the ship together. The door closed, the engines roared, and the mountains fell away beneath them. For Rylon, the quiet life was over, but for the first time in years, he didn't miss it.